you were helping to build the architecture. You were gathering all that data and building a framework that would allow you and business to see what the future was likely to bring if they followed a particular pathway.
Yeah, correct. And I think there's so many parallels. I think in this sense, I mean, just to cut a long story short, this set of companies that we created, both not for profit and for profit, enabled the creation of, at the time, the world's largest financial market database, which kept in partnership with back then Reuters globally and more recently Thomson Reuters. Where we basically effectively developed a service that was actually grown for research use that ended up providing a service to global financial markets for the development of algorithmic trading and compliance regimes within some of the big financial institutions around the world, as well as provide a service, say, for the Federal Reserve in the US for market surveillance and for insider trading. So this is a system that was a millisecond by millisecond timestamp data that would enable regulators to identify trades that were happening, seconds before an authorised announcement on the market, for example. So today, that system is still being used to prosecute cases for insider trading, as an example. What came from very humble beginnings back there in the late 90s and early 2000s was something that I understand now that service has been bought and sold a few times, but I understand the last transaction in the US valued that service, that product effectively, at something in excess of $2 billion.
That's extraordinary.
But that's the commercial story behind it. But one of the things that came out of it is that we grew from a couple of universities to pretty much every university in Australia and New Zealand had the service. We had a service that was being subsidised by, that we commercialised in partnership with Thomson Reuters, but was at the same time providing very highly reliable, robust data to researchers who were then feeding the innovation engine. And we found a way of actually having that data service serve multiple purposes: a research innovation system purpose, a commercial service for the banks and others to make money, build algorithms, and for the regulator to keep them honest for surveillance purposes. So when if I draw a quick parallel there, George. So one of the early projects that Food Agility has undertaken with a company called The Yield and the oyster industry in New South Wales and the food safety regulator here is to effectively measure through some sensing provided through one of our other partners, Bosch, to measure salinity, turbidity, UV, temperature and so on of the water that the oysters are sitting in. And so what this means is that this data is highly reliable. It can be fed at any time, and that can be converted and feed into a decision support tool for the oyster grower, and help them on farm, for example, to determine when they might schedule labour onto the farm, etc. But importantly, this is a more accurate means to determine whether or not you should close an oyster farm because of too much, because of the water being in a form that will effectively get, for example, when there's lots of rain, it runs off into the estuary, and so then the oysters become a health risk. The regulator jumps in and tells the oyster grower to stop harvesting. Now, previously that was done based on rainfall alone, and of course, that was a very coarse measure. But with this really tight, highly reliable Internet of Things enabled device in the water, the farmer now gets the data, the regulator gets it, the regulator now sets the harvest closures based on these measures. The regulator and the farmer see exactly the same information. So now the farmer knows when they're going to be closed. They can take mitigating actions, and the regulator is happy because it's low cost and they've got a more accurate way. And recent evidence and backcasting this data has demonstrated that we would have, had we've used this system, it would have returned some weeks of harvesting back to the oyster industry and saving them millions of dollars. So there's an example of the one sort of knowledge infrastructure, if I can call it that, a measurement underpinned by a really robust, reliable measurement system that's providing a decision support for the oyster grower. It's providing support for the regulator and creating some transparency there. But also, importantly, this data is now also being fed to the researchers at UTS in science there, who are using it to predict disease. So as an example, there's a disease called Pacific oyster mortality syndrome. We think it's a virus that's triggered by constant humidity in the water, so that is so that's something we can measure, and so we think that we could provide sort of early warning to a grower that they've got a higher likelihood of contracting this virus in those circumstances. So that's an example of how the common infrastructure can be used for multiple purposes if we play the game right. And Food Agility is taken those early lessons from the finance sector, and now that we're seeing the proliferation of Internet of Things, sensing devices, the more accurate and fine granularity of remote sensing from satellites and from drones, and all the robotics and the sophisticated equipment that we have measuring things, is starting to get us in the same agriculture, in the same box seat that financial markets were 20 years ago, in the sense of having access to this data in a reliable way moves us closer and closer to being able to develop self-learning algorithms. In other words, artificial intelligence.
Mike,
we're already seeing some.
What's fascinating is you're giving us a tremendous example of how Fintech, this term that we've struggled to understand, how it comes together, how it's evolved, and how it gives not only the growers, the markets as well, a sense of what's coming up tomorrow and how they can set their prices and this, that, and the other. And it also gives, as you said earlier, the opportunity for growers to protect their yield, their harvests, by being alert enough to see the danger coming, as you said. That's an outstanding example of technology, of financial technology. But it's also remarkable how we've seen the addition now of all these new tools, and you add AI to it, and it gives farmers now, I'm sure, an opportunity to do things that they couldn't do because they didn't have the labour. Is that also something that we can look forward to in the future? No, I think so. And we're seeing really good examples of some ag tech companies coming through now that are able to, with an almost incredible degree of accuracy, predict harvest yield on crops and so on. And Mike, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but once again, really appreciate the opportunity to get a bit more understanding about how Fintech is changing our future and giving our ag tech businesses and our people who've been in the business for a lifetime more tools to make tomorrow even smarter and even better. Thank you very much, Mike Briers, for joining us on The Informer.
Yeah, well put, George. Thank you.